I'll stop there. Any comments, any questions? It's all making sense? Somebody's recording me.
And Monica, I just wanted to agree with your philosophy about making these segmented KPIs, that they really need to adapt to not just your business strategy, but also your business condition and what you're trying to do. The more intimate you can make those measurements, the better they're going to work for you. And again, using your key indicators are really, it's going to keep you out of trouble, hopefully, or it's going to alert you ahead of time, and you'll be proactive rather than reactive. So.
Exactly. So remember that we're talking about supplier management. We're not talking about sending a report card out that is, I worked with a lot of government clients in the past, and they have a supplier performance rating that they do because it's mandatory once a year, and the supplier waits for it. It shows up in their inbox and they say, okay, and then they move on. But if you're really working a supplier management program, you're having those dialogues, you're having you're deciding who to have the dialogue with first, but you're having some dialogue so that it's not something that's surprised. And it does support the overall business strategy. So thanks for your comments. So here's an example of one. This is probably one of the most famous. It was a company used this way back in the 90s and 2000s, and is still using it today. And I've introduced it to many, many companies. So, and that's the TQRDCE. So what's added to that is the environment side of it, because the sustainability aspects is so important, especially as we go through life now. So it's becoming, this was already in the program when this was developed with another client, but it's something to focus in on. And not everybody remembers that piece of it. They don't think sustainability. They think of making sure they got all the parts on time and they can run the supply chain. So let me break this down a little bit for you. It measures technology because the technology brings in new product development. It brings in some cases, IP that is needed to be able to take both companies to a heightened level of capabilities. Quality, without a doubt, is one of the strongest portions here. As a matter of fact, I sat through one quarterly business review with this particular supplier, and my company had a quality flaw and zeroed out the quality score, and because it was a line stop, literally had a 0 on the entire scorecard. So it was very punitive, which I'm not in favor of, but it does stress the highest levels of what's important to our customer at that time. Responsiveness, we already know that the responsiveness is how quickly can you deliver on my commitments, whether that be a request for quote, whether that be delivery to my request date, or whether that be anything having to do with being responsive to the customer's desires. Delivery is on time to request and on time to commit. So we measured both, and I would suggest, unless you are truly have an end-to-end lean supply chain, it's best to measure both. And the main reason is if you don't measure the on time to request, you don't know what your gap is in order to be able to fulfill the requirements for your customer or for your supplier to you. So if you only measure on time to commit, then I'm doing what I say I will do. That's important, but sometimes you need to do what someone asks you to do. Keep that in mind. And then cost is self-explanatory. So this example that I put in here was an example of an online version of this scorecard that was used for the supplier that looks at giving scores based on each of these different dimensions. So I'll let you parse that a little bit. So there's the technology, here's the quality, responsiveness, delivery, and then cost. All right. So another version is another dimension that we use. Instead of using technology, we use technical. And underneath each one of the dimensions that you see in the left-hand column here, you can see the weighting. So now we're saying for this particular scorecard that was created for a client and their supply base, the most important thing that they saw was quality, followed by delivery and cost. So technology and responsiveness still carried weight, but not nearly as heavy. So they looked at, you know, the reliability aspects of it and brought the quality pieces of the reliability in before they brought the responsiveness in. And then here are some of the metrics. So remember I said be very clear and use simple. So here are the metrics, very simply stated, but also a description of what is it measuring. So then there's a whole packet behind that to say, okay, this is how I calculated it for these orders, et cetera, or in this time frame. And normally these are done on a monthly or a quarterly basis and then reviewed between supplier and customer. Make sense? All right. So the other thing that I want to stress is when you're trying to figure out what to put on those scorecards, one of the most difficult thing is who's going to pick the measures, who's going to do that work. And what I've found has been the most successful is when you use a cross-functional team. So, and the cross-functional team uses at least these people where appropriate, people from operations, because they know their business and they know what they want that supplier to be able to provide or be able to provide to the customer. The planning department obviously needs to know, is my material there on time? How much do I have variability that I need to be able to put something into the metric to drive that capability? Distribution and logistics, so that you can ensure the safe delivery from the supplier to the customer. Sourcing and procurement, of course, they're there, looking at making sure contracts are adhered to, costs follow in the proper expectation, and manage all of the order management pieces of it. Most people kind of forget a little bit about R&D and process and materials engineering, but bringing in those two groups help you not only see what's happening today and what the trends are based on whether it's a quality flaw, whether it's a design issue, whether it's a difficulty in manufacturing, and they can take those ideas and help use those to make the product better at the next rev or at the next product redesign. So that's where the design for manufacturability or serviceability or all of those aspects come into play. What I'll tell you, another example that I have is way back when I started out in the supply chain world as an engineer, we didn't have any engineers in the supply chain arena. We had buyers and planners and analysts, but nobody that really could engineer or re-engineer the product or the process. And so, you know, we took the step that many companies did back in the long time ago in the 80s, and that was we brought materials engineers and process engineers into the supply chain world to work with our suppliers and to work with our design teams. And lo and behold, what we found was when we started looking at the segmentation of the commodities of all of the parts that we took care of, and we started saying, okay, well, how could we do this better? We sent out, along with all of the drawings to validate these particular parts that we were building. It was for a door lock. We sent out not only the parts and the drawings, but the next higher level assembly, and then solicited the suppliers to help us. Are there steps that we can, you know, get rid of so that we can have it more manufacturable? Can we take 3 parts and make 1 out of it? Can we do co-molding? Can we do all these different processes? And it made a world of difference and transformed our supply chain to be much more robust and collaborative with the supply base, because now we were bringing other capabilities into our into our arena. We didn't have to just look at terms and conditions and costs and, you know, on-time receipts. We could look at re-engineering the product for, you know, a better use. So it was quite exciting. It was a great way to get my feet wet, but, you know, I also brought a lot of my colleagues into the fold with me. And then finally, quality and IT are also dimensions that are very helpful as you're trying to put this package together and start working on the supplier development. Anybody have anything? Any questions? All right.
No, sounding good.
All right, thanks. So the thing is, who do you do this with? Who do you set up the scorecard? How do you set up quarterly business reviews? Who do you do that with? Do you do it with everybody? And I hope you're all sitting there saying, well, shoot, no, we couldn't do that with all 3,000 suppliers we have, or if you're really advanced, all 30 suppliers that we have. And instead, you want to look at, you know, what is the top tier? What are the highest relevant that suppliers are in your business? So what's your tier one or class A suppliers that maybe comprise critical components and high dollar items and a high dollar volume? So you look at the spend, you look at the strategic relevance, you look at the volume, you look at technology leadership, or are they transactional? In other words, they don't help you with anything having to do with the technology. And then look at, you know, how is the product being used across multiple sites? Sometimes it may be a real low user at site A, but site B has a very high relationship, or business unit B has a high requirement there. Those are all candidates for having some sort of a quarterly business review. And I'll tell you from experience that in sharing that information across the enterprise is so important, because what I have seen happen, especially in aerospace, is one division for a company that I used to work for loved a supplier, always giving them new work, et cetera, and had pretty high volume and good margins with that supplier. The another one of the business units in that same enterprise could not for the life of them get them to deliver on time, deliver a quality part, you know, even work with them. And so consequently, what was happening is it didn't matter because the two businesses never spoke to each other, right? So the quarterly business reviews were done at the business unit level, not at the enterprise level. And so consequently, they didn't care about what was happening over in landing gear because they had aerostructures, right? So those are just some of the examples that I've seen. So defining that strategic alliance and that partnership needs to be done at the enterprise level, and you need to have all the counterparts in the seats making those decisions. Then that second tier, that middle tier, are the preferred suppliers. So having a conversation or having that business review with those suppliers on a quarterly basis or at least annually is advisable. And then the approved suppliers are usually the transactional ones that you just want to make sure that they're delivering on time, at cost, and a quality part. So maybe you can at least provide a scorecard on a monthly or quarterly basis, and maybe you have a conversation at a supplier day or an event where they're invited to come and, you know, learn more about your business. This in line with all of your companies? I'm sure you all do this, right? I don't see any thumbs up. You know, that's since I can't see your face, you could go like that. All right. Do you have something, Jerry?
Well, I was going to say this is perfect on how we teach it, but I hesitate to think that companies actually get on board with it. My experience with companies in KPI is is unfortunately they just want to use them for blaming problems and not getting to the point of improvement. So I think this is great stuff if companies would just do it.
Yeah, and quite frankly, I agree. There are a lot of firms that maybe just look at this as this is the theory or the academic. I drew these from real life examples where
Right.
supplier development and supplier management was really a part of their DNA. So we did do this. When it works, it's great.
Exactly. I think there's a significant difference between companies that understand supplier development and take approaches similar to this, and those companies that just don't get it. They're just working in the back ages of how to manage suppliers.
Yeah. So here's just kind of an overview of the collaboration. So we talk a lot when we talk about S&OP or integrated business planning, and we talk about a lot of the tools that we're using in our supply chain academics or our processes to make better. We talk about having that open kimono or full view of the supply chain. But what I wanted to stress with this slide was, of course, there are more suppliers below the suppliers and sometimes even more customers above the customers. But if you look at what the flow of orders or information or how things are being pulled, it's generally from customer to the manufacturing site to the supplier or to whatever you're producing. And then the products have a flow the other way. I should put a return because products do go back when we have these reverse logistics and returns. But the thing to look at is, where do you put the metrics and where do you put the tools? So the practices there are listed in green of, let's say, two important ones that are in this example are capacity planning and collaborative demand planning. So using those practices to be able to reinforce the relationships and being able to have constructive dialogue between all of the partners is key. Whereas on the bottom in the blue, where you see those are the metrics that were chosen: quality, delivery, and cost, from the supplier's performance to your company, and then your performance to your customer. So this is how it would look like if it all came together. And granted, there are many more processes inside of all of this. The one thing to think about here is, if you look at managing your supplier, you can indicate what your expectations are to your supplier fairly easily. You know what you want. You can put it into a scorecard and measure that and show your supplier, and then have the dialogue if it's appropriate or not. It's usually, I've found, much harder to go the other way. So when you establish those requirements or those metrics that you want to use to be able to measure your supply chain on the downstream, so sending to your supplier, that's a little bit tougher, because you may be measuring something that you think is very important to being able to execute to your business philosophy, and that customer may not even care about it. So the most important thing is having that collaborative, not just demand planning, but collaborative relationship to know what's important to you, using tools like voice of the customer, using queries or quarterly business reviews to be able to bring that dialogue. That's what's key in making those metrics then relevant.
Hey, Monica,
Yep.
sorry, if I could
Okay.
ask one question about the previous slide.
Sure.
When you talk about the capacity planning, is that both capacity and material planning, or just capacity planning at that point?
Yeah, it's both. I just put examples of practices. So one practice is rough cut capacity planning that you would use. So it's just a tool.
And what about sourcing more than one or multiple suppliers? What are your feelings on that?
Yeah. So it again, it depends. I'm in favor of having single sources. However, with the risk factor, you have to decide whether it's the right thing to do or not. So I'm not in favor on having 3 or 5 suppliers just so that I can pit them against each other. I'd rather have the relationship and ensure that, you know, the businesses are working together so that both can be profitable. That's what's important. I mean, I am not from the Iacocca days.
Well, I guess I wasn't so much trying to pit one against the other as it seems as though capacity, and I look at it as capacity is much harder to, or much easier to get than supply of product is most of the time. If you've got a critical part shortage, whatever it is, you can have all the capacity in the world, doesn't do you any good. But if you have multiple sources, then you might be able to have a source of capacity and supply in 2 different places rather than just one. So I understand the single source, but if it's available, easily available, I would opt for having either second and third sources whenever I could.
Yeah, so topic for another PDM sometime, or for reading up on, and that is making sure that your commodity strategies align to what your business needs. So when you set up your supply chain strategy, one of the things that you would look at, just as an aside, is, okay, in this particular commodity, what's my risk of having a sole source? Do I need to have redundant suppliers to be able to protect my customers and my business? And what does that mean? But it's really done by commodity or by supplier segmentation. So I would say that's one of the first things that you have to do before you just jump into capacity planning. You really have to have a good commodity roadmap or a supplier segmentation understanding of what you want your supply-based demographics to look like.
Monica, that's what's the best way to drive that type of strategic development and thinking and documentation in an organization?
You mean for the supplier segmentation?
The description you were just providing about knowing which suppliers which product, more importantly, and from what suppliers are more critical than others, so that your commodity strategy is tied to everything else you're trying to talk about here, the KPIs and the whole flow.
Yeah, I think probably the best way to do it is, and the way that it's most, it appeals to people that are maybe not in the supply chain to see that it's a good reason or a good method to use, is once you monetize that and look at the number of part numbers, the number of dollars, and the number of suppliers that are spent by commodity, and graphically represent this. This is the only way that I got, when I was in industry, I got the attention of the CFO to say, oh, I get it now. I see what you're trying to do. Basically, we were chartered with reducing the supply base, by close to 80%. And while that was a noble effort, we came back and said, we can't, because based on this commodity, I need to have these suppliers because they're my this is the way they strategically fit. And here's the demographics of it. Here's the cost. Here's the impact it has to the product. So it's really it's really data based.
So if there's kind of a thread there, then it's the collaboration of multi functions, but especially get the finance on board.
Oh yeah. They'll see it the fastest.
Good point.
Engineering will help you implement it, but the CFO will say, oh yeah, I get it.
He or she
always goes to finance. Oh, God.
Hey.
Follow the money.
I'll tell you, my best allies have always been the CFO and quality. So if I had those two functional areas, the support of them, we could sway the entire ship. We could make that whole big behemoth ship move. So nice. In closing, what I want to let you know is in developing a supplier development program, there's really 6 major elements that you should consider and you should walk through. So make sure that you're working with your suppliers and understand, have them understand where your goals are and make sure their goals are in alignment. The worst thing you do is you pick the suppliers that are going to be in that commodity and they have different goals and there is no alignment. If sustainability is an issue and maybe sound geopolitical influences are there, and you're dealing with someone that is dealing with conflict minerals, that is, a pirate, obviously you're not going to have a goal alignment. So, understand how you can pull that all together. Then establish your performance measurements and targets based on your strategies and your goals. Set up the framework for those suppliers that will be a strategic alliance. And then as you're working through those quarterly business reviews, it's not just here's my information. It should be a two-way street, and develop improvement initiatives that help both sides of the business. One of the things that we added to our contracts back when I was in aerospace and in industrial products is we said, okay, supplier, if you came up, pardon me? That if the supplier came in and gave us a cost reduction or an idea for a cost reduction, and all it required from us was a documentation change or some slight change, we let them essentially keep that cost reduction until the next round, and then we would share in that cost reduction. So it's developing those improvement initiatives, but then also recognizing that and allowing for performance improvements. And then monitor those metrics that you set up to that scorecard all the way back, and then develop the infrastructure to be able to support that. So my closing thoughts are: pick your suppliers wisely, using segmentation, using sound decision-making and supplier selection criteria, not lowest piece price. Use metrics that'll have an impact. Collaborate both internally and externally. Start internally, make sure you are all on the same page, and then work with the externally and bring the supplier development process to life. And then drive continuous improvement and learning. Sharing those Six Sigma resources, or those quality engineers, or people that have an expertise that maybe your supplier doesn't or your customer doesn't. Sharing those resources across companies goes a long way towards improving the performance. And that's all I have to say about that. Any questions?
It was a good job.
Just want to say.
Hi, I'm Rich Witzel with Air Products and Chemicals. I just wanted to, I was looking for more like internal measures since we do like large capital equipment that takes several years to complete. But I just want to let you know it was great. I got some good ideas for getting those internal measures. So I do thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for attending. Anyone else? Well, now I know what it feels like when nobody asks any questions.
You covered it too
You
thorough.
covered it very nicely.
Oh, thank you.
And you got peppered with some questions during the presentation too.
I did. Oh, I like it. I think it works a little bit better if we have some dialogue in there.
This sounds. This is a very appropriate subject matter. And when you were talking earlier, and some of the questions that were coming from Bill, and again we got Jane there being very quiet. To me, this is almost an opportunity for a great panel conversation down the road as a PDM. What do you think about a panel discussion on a hot topic?
Sure. Moderated questions. How would you deal with this?
Right.
How have you deal with? Yeah, I think that'd be great.
Yeah. And did well, it may or may not be a separate discussion, but recently there's been the announcement from ASCM on the procurement certificate. Have you viewed that product?
I have not, but several of my colleagues have already gotten the certificate. It's a certificate.
It's okay. Enough said. Thank you.
All right, Jerry, what does that mean for us that aren't involved in the politics of Apex?
There's no
No,
politics.
it's-
That's not politics of
I-
Apex.
Yeah, so I don't want to misconstrue this. It's not that I don't support it. I think Apex has done a nice job trying to integrate the procurement functions into the supply chain, because
Right.
classically it's been more about the planning side of it and the
Exactly.
execution and the resources. By bringing in the logistics teams, the CLTD, and now the procurement certificate, it's becoming more holistic. I will say that CSCMP has a similar certificate. However, it is far more robust when it talks about each of those.
And Frank, I think really the key element that maybe we were using sign language and should not have been is the difference between the terms certification and certificate. While they sound almost alike, they're head and shoulders different. And
Yes.
And so in the education world, there's a shift, or at least I'm noticing a trend where things are going to more at a credentialing level, at a certificate level, as opposed to a full-blown certification.
Okay.
Yeah, the major difference is with a certification, you have to maintain your capabilities. Whereas if you have a certificate, it's a one and done. And I could say the same thing about SCORE, because SCORE is only an endorsement, although I am sure that SCORE within the next few years will become a certification. And it is not something that you can use if you have not kept up on it.
Well, that's